Richard Hayes Phillips holds a BA in politics from the State University of New York at Potsdam, an MA in geography and an MA in history from the University of Oklahoma, and a PhD in geomorphology from the University of Oregon. A former college professor, he has taught 12 different courses in geology, geography, and history. He's investigated the use of herbicides containing dioxin in New York and groundwater hydrology at nuclear dump sites in New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. He's written or co-authored more than a dozen geologic and hydrologic papers, which he has submitted to regulatory agencies, and he's 4 times been recognized as an expert witness in state and federal proceedings, twice as a geologist and twice as an election fraud investigator. So, very interesting background. He's going to tell you a little bit more of how he got into this and how he gave up his life for a few years, and show you the evidence for fraud at the Ohio election, and also how you go about investigating elections. I don't know how much before election stuff you're going to talk about. Maybe talking about after election stuff. At the workshop tomorrow, we have a book that is produced by another election watchdog, Black Box Voting, and it talks more about the before the election stuff that you do to ensure that elections are fair and honest.
Well, thank you for coming. I never sought to be an election fraud investigator. As I said, I used to have a life as a field geologist and an acoustic musician and a trailblazer and trail maintenance worker in the Adirondacks and the Blue Ridge. I distrusted the election results as early as election night, when it became apparent that neither Bush nor Kerry could win without Ohio. I watched as J. Kenneth Blackwell, then the Secretary of State of Ohio and coincidentally the state chair of the Bush-Cheney election campaign, strode onto the national stage and announced that there were 155,000 provisional ballots left to be counted. They were from all over the place. This would not be enough to overcome George Bush's margin, and John Kerry ought to concede. I thought it was inappropriate for the top election official in the state, who is in charge of overseeing the elections, to pressure any candidate to concede. But I also knew from the experience in Florida 2000 that there must also be regular ballots cast at the polls, not provisionally, for which no vote had been recorded for president. I searched Blackwell's website looking for the turnout data. Voter turnout is ballots cast divided by registered voters, expressed as a percentage. What I wanted was the total ballots cast. I found this information already tucked away in the historical archives section of Blackwell's website. And by the sophisticated mathematical technique of subtraction, I took the total ballots cast county by county, subtracted the votes counted for president, and discovered that there were, in fact, another 93,000 uncounted ballots in Ohio at the time that John Kerry conceded the election, making 248,000 uncounted votes, which is what CBS News had reported, which is why CBS News had declined to call Ohio for Bush until Kerry conceded the election the next day. What annoyed me about this was not the fortunes of the candidates, but the notion that some people's votes count and some people's votes don't count. Well, 10 days after the election, I received an unsolicited email from Fernwoods. She turned out to be Karen Giles, who lives on a mountaintop in Pennsylvania and who had recently added me to her massive emailing list. And her email asked words to this effect: Could somebody please look at these numbers? This looks like proof to me. She forwarded to me numbers from the home page of the website of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, where Cleveland is located. That is the #1 Democratic stronghold in the state of Ohio. They were reporting on their home page 250,000 more ballots cast than registered voters, and I knew that couldn't be right. So I called up the Board of Elections, and they told me not to worry about it. They said it was a data entry error, something about counting absentee ballots twice, but that it didn't carry over into the candidates' vote totals. Well, being an inquisitive sort, I started downloading the candidates' vote totals, precinct by precinct. There are something like 1,435 precincts in Cuyahoga County. I have dial-up access, so it took 4 hours. And I got up at 2 in the morning and immediately saw obviously erroneous election results of a far different kind. There were extraordinary numbers of votes turning up in the columns of third-party presidential candidates whom I had never heard of. In some precincts in Ward 2, I believe it was, there were more than 30% of the votes counted for Michael Badnarik in one precinct, 40% of the votes counted for Michael Perutka. And this was true in other precincts as well, though the percentages weren't as high. So I spent another 4 hours downloading the precinct results from the 2000 election, and I saw that these were precincts that were historically Democratic. In fact, they had voted 92, 95, even 98% for Al Gore. These were clearly carry votes shifting to other candidates. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but it made me a witness to a crime. And my mother had taught me that a witness must come forward. So Karen Giles, a.k.a. Fernwoods, put me in touch with Bob Fitrakis, the publisher of the Columbus Free Press, and I remember 4 things that he told me in the first phone conversation. This is the sort of attention to detail that we need. We'll publish your work. This is the most difficult thing you will ever do because there is a different story in every county. This is the most important thing you will ever do, and this will make you famous. I did the work anyway. Bob gave me many leads, nearly all of which turned out to be true. He told me why the lines at the polls in Columbus were so long. People waited up to 4 hours to cast their ballots, if indeed they could even stay that long. Many people had to leave without voting. The lines were out the door, down the block, around the corner in a cold November rain. The reason was that 122 voting machines had been withheld, not delivered to any polling place anywhere. 68 of them were never intended to be delivered. They were left in the warehouse all day long. Another 54 voting machines, according to documents from the Board of Elections, were scheduled to be delivered, all of them to precincts in Columbus, which is, of course, the Democratic stronghold. We even have their blacked out, redacted serial numbers. But these machines were loaded onto a truck and just driven around Columbus all day. And there were other machines that were delivered during the day, but not at the start of the polls. It was an easy task to calculate what the vote count might have been if all the machines had been deployed and distributed in an equitable manner by assuming the same percentage of votes officially reported, ward by ward and town by town, but assuming an equitable turnout due to an equitable distribution of voting machines. I calculated that the discriminatory allocation of voting machines in Columbus alone resulted in a net loss of 17,000 votes for John Kerry. Now, the Columbus Dispatch, in an attempt to discredit me, said, oh, no, we don't think it was 17,000 votes. We think it was more like 15,000 votes. So I take that as vindication of my work. Thank you very much. Bob Fitrakis called a public meeting in the presence of notaries public and took affidavits from voters who had been disenfranchised while their memories were fresh. And he told me two stories about electronic voting machines in Ohio. In Franklin County, in Columbus, they had push-button electronic machines, and many voters complained that they would push the button for Kerry, and the Kerry vote would light up and then fade away from the screen, resulting in an undervote or no vote for president. By comparing the percentage of undervotes or no votes in the 2004 election to the 2000 election, it was apparent that Kerry had lost about another 3,000 votes in this manner. But worse yet, in Youngstown, in Mahoning County, voters were complaining on the touchscreen machines that if they touched the screen for Kerry, Bush would light up. There were never any complaints of people touching the screen for Bush and Kerry lighting up. It was always votes hopping from Kerry to Bush. Even the Board of Elections reported this to the press on election night. They said that at least 20 to 30 machines had to be shut down and recalibrated for this reason, but that some of them were allowed to operate all day long. Now, half the complaints were from wards 1 and 2, and in one of the precincts, I was able to show how and why this happened. There were 6 complaints in this precinct. 3 voters on 2 different machines complained that they had to scroll through twice or even 5 times to get their Kerry vote to register. 3 other voters complained that they never saw a presidential choice appear on the screen. They never got the chance to vote for president, so they voted for the other offices and filed complaints. Now, shouldn't there be at least 3 more ballots cast than votes counted for president? Shouldn't there be 3 undervotes for president? There were none. There were 0. Every single person who touched a screen in that precinct had a vote recorded for president, even if they never saw a presidential choice appear on the screen. I conclude that these touchscreen machines were programmed to default to candidate Bush. And if you chose not to vote for president, or failed to override the default choice, or never saw a presidential choice appear on the screen, you were voting for Bush. And those would just be the machines that were rigged and malfunctioning because you weren't supposed to see the unseen default choice. And immediately after I published my paper, I received 71 complaints from Florida, from Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward counties, 2004, from voters who saw their votes for Democratic candidates hop to Republican candidates, not just for president, but for United States Senate as well. There were complaints in some of the red counties also. Most of these I will save for later in the presentation. But I should tell you about Miami County, Ohio. This is in western Ohio. It's not where Miami University is located. On election night, after 100% of the precincts had reported, another 19,000 votes appeared in the totals. Now, admittedly, the early results appeared to show too few votes, but the later results appeared to show too many. What raised eyebrows was that it raised George Bush's plurality to 16,000 votes exactly, 160,000, and that the percentages for the candidates remained essentially unchanged. One of them changed by only 0.03%. The other one was unchanged to the hundredths of a percent, almost as if the optical scanners were programmed to produce a 16,000 vote margin at the existing ratio between the candidates. So I thought, gee, wouldn't this raise the voter turnout percentage perilously close to 100% in some of those precincts? It took me until December 8th to get the official results, but when they were faxed to me, I saw that, yes, indeed, in Concord Southwest, the official turnout was 98.55%. 679 out of 689 registered voters cast ballots for president. In another Concord precinct, it was over 95%. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever engaged in get out the vote efforts, but those numbers are impossible. You can't get 98% of the voters to turn out. In fact, some of them have died or moved away and can't turn out. So these anomalies made me wanted to look at the ballots. But there's one more story that we discovered early on that requires a little explanation, but it's important because there are large numbers of votes involved. This is what Jesse Jackson has forever dubbed the Connolly anomaly. Ellen Connolly was a little-known African-American municipal judge from Cleveland who had never run a county-wide race. And she was recruited to run for the Democratic nomination for Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. And she won the primary and was on the ballot in November against a well-financed white male incumbent Chief Justice named Thomas Moyer. Now, both races were close. Ellen Connolly officially got 47% of the vote, a very impressive showing. And John Kerry officially got 49% of the vote. But there were 6 million votes cast for president and only 4.8 million votes cast for Chief Justice. For every 10 people who voted for president, only 8 made a choice for Chief Justice, and that is to be expected. Down-ticket races don't draw as many votes as the top of the ticket. So you would expect, since both races were close, that the presidential candidates would get more votes than the Chief Justice candidates in county after county in Ohio. But there were 12 counties in southwestern Ohio where John Kerry was awarded fewer votes than Ellen Connolly. Not just a lower percentage of the vote, fewer votes. In 3 of those counties, Claremont, Butler, and Warren, which surround Hamilton County where Cincinnati is located, those 3 counties gave Bush his entire statewide margin of victory. And you couldn't account for George Bush's vote totals unless there were at least 13,500 people who voted for a liberal black woman from Cleveland for Chief Justice and for George W. Bush for president. And this was based on the extremely conservative assumption that all Thomas Moyer's voters voted for Bush, and everybody who didn't vote for Chief Justice voted for Bush. You still couldn't account for Bush's vote totals. In fact, in 3 of those counties, John Kerry was awarded fewer votes than Al Gore had gotten in 2000, despite a very large increase in turnout, 15% increase over the 2000 election. Gore did not contest Ohio in 2000. He pulled out a month before the election to concentrate his resources on Florida. So what the official results were telling me is that George Bush got all the new voters, all the Nader voters, because he had been removed from the ballot by the courts in 2004, and some of the Gore voters, or the equivalent, or else the official results were not true and correct. Now, I interviewed Ellen Connolly. She never set foot in southwestern Ohio. She had not one yard sign in southwestern Ohio. She spent 1 nickel per vote received statewide in Ohio. And John Kerry, the best financed Democratic presidential candidate in the history of this country, could not get as many votes as Ellen Connolly. Well, I wrote all this up and more and testified for 4 hours under oath in a lonely hotel room before a court reporter in Columbus for the Ohio Supreme Court, hoping to get a hearing. We never did get a hearing. There was no discovery of evidence, no deposition of hostile witnesses. In Ohio, the Chief Justice, all by his lonesome, gets to decide whether or not to hear an election challenge. You can appeal his decision to the full court. But if there's no hearing, there's no decision to appeal. And I thought it came with poor grace and had the appearance of a conflict of interest for Chief Justice Moyer to decline to hear our challenge, given that we were challenging not only the alleged victory of George W. Bush, but also the alleged victory of Thomas Moyer. We had evidence in other counties of Ellen Connolly's votes being shifted to Thomas Moyer. Now, during this time, I had a lot of help. My first radio appearance was in Berkeley, and a number of people volunteered to collect precinct data from the boards of elections and to convert them into tables and spreadsheets for me so that I could do the analysis for more counties in the crunching time frame during which an election can be challenged. They were so enthusiastic, they collected and turned into tables and spreadsheets 82% of the election results in Ohio. So I kept looking at them. Every time I was invited to a national conference, I would do up another paper. I looked at more Connolly anomaly counties, and two of my favorites are these. In Auglaize County, where the deputy director of the Board of Elections resigned in humiliation about 3 weeks before the election because an ES&S voting company technician gained unauthorized access to their central tabulator. When I looked at the results in this electronic voting county, I saw that John Kerry got fewer votes than almost the entire Democratic ticket. Not just fewer votes than Ellen Connolly, but fewer votes than all three Democratic candidates for the Ohio Supreme Court, all of whom lost their elections, and fewer votes than the Democratic candidates for Congress, state representative, and county commissioner, all of whom lost in landslides. In one precinct, I remember Kerry got 188 votes, and the candidate for Congress got 399. In Mercer County, Ohio, where it was reported that on election night, the Board of Elections at first posted more ballots cast than the total population of the county, I asked for the precinct results for the general election, and they sent me the results for the March primary instead. I was annoyed. When I finally got the results for the general election, I thought, well, I might as well compare the two. I've got them. And it turned out that there were 4 precincts in Mercer County where Kerry and Edwards got more votes between them in the March primary than the ticket was awarded in the November election with its much greater turnout, which is to say that Bush got the votes of everybody who didn't vote in the primary, all the Democrats who didn't vote for Kerry and Edwards, and even some of the Kerry and Edwards voters, or else the official results were not true and correct. I saw one other anomaly, which I satirically called log cabin Republicans in Ohio. Ohio was one of several states where a proposed constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage or anything resembling it was on the ballot. And we all know that one of the reasons was to turn out rural white evangelical voters who may have stayed at home in the 2000 election, and maybe they'd turn out in 2004, and they would, of course, be more likely to vote for Bush than for Kerry. Well, issue 1, the ban on gay marriage, passed overwhelmingly with 61% of the vote, and almost everybody voted on it. There were very few undervotes or no votes for issue 1. So if issue 1 got 61% of the vote officially, and Bush got 51% of the vote officially, Again, you would expect the ban on gay marriage to get more votes than George W. Bush in county after county in Ohio. But there were 3 counties out of 88, by definition an anomaly, where you couldn't account for George Bush's vote totals unless there were at least 10,000 gay-friendly Bush voters. And this would be a net total, because for every Kerry voter who voted to ban gay marriage, and there must have been many, the ban carried with 61% of the vote, there'd have to be yet another gay-friendly Bush voter. Well, this was the paper that brought me to the attention of Rolling Stone magazine, and I got an email asking if I would consent to be interviewed by Rolling Stone. Well, I'm a musician. That was an easy call. So I had a long conversation, and Tim Dickinson, the contributing editor, said, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was writing an article on the 2004 election in Ohio. Would I be willing to research some things for this article, in addition to the works I'd already written? So I went back to Ohio, out of pocket as usual, to answer the question as to whether or not the voter rolls in Cuyahoga County, where Cleveland is located, had been purged between the 2000 and 2004 elections. And I found that, yes, there have been 2 purges of the voter rolls. 168,000 names had been purged, including 64,000 names in Cleveland alone, including more than 30% of the registered voters in entire wards. Now, the reason to purge the voter rolls is because you do not want voters who have died or moved away to have somebody else voting in their place. And the Board of Elections, of course, has no way to ascertain whether the voters who have shown no interest in the last 4 years still live there or not. So if there's been no activity in 4 years, the boards of elections have the option of putting these voters on an inactive list, which, by the way, is what they do in Missoula County after 2 years, and they leave you on an inactive list for 4 years in case you decide that you're now interested in voting. But that's not how they do it in Cuyahoga County. They simply purge you from the rolls. So if you show up at the polls and you're not on the rolls, they give you a provisional ballot, and it doesn't count because you're not on the rolls. Now, the percentage of voters purged, ward by ward or town by town, should correlate with, bear some resemblance to, the percentage of voters who did not vote in the last 4 years. That's why you purge the rolls. And the best indicator would be the previous presidential election because it usually draws the biggest turnout. But that's not what we found. Rather, we found, generally speaking, that the higher the percentage of the vote won by Al Gore in 2000, the higher the percentage of voters purged in 2001 and 2003. Democratic wards were targeted for partisan political purposes. Is there any way I can get some water to drink? Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Also, if you want to save your voice, you can use that microphone.
Well, I've already gone this far without, so my voice does carry. I'm a singer and a former college professor. Now, it was during this time that I was working on the Rolling Stone article that the Ohio Attorney General, Jim Petro, ruled that the ballots were in fact public record. I'm not certain why it took so long. It was now 1.5 years after the election, the spring of 2006. It was a bit late. But now we were finally going to get a chance to look at the actual forensic evidence. And I started to send public records requests to the most suspect counties in Ohio. I got to select the precincts that I wanted to audit. And I must take a moment here to explain what is meant by an election audit, because there seems to be an attempt to confuse the issue. There are people who want you to believe that an election audit consists of recounting the ballots in a small percentage of the precincts selected at random. No, that's a spot check. When the IRS audits your taxes, you don't get to decide which documents to provide them. They want it all, and we wanted it all. Ballots, poll books, voter signature books, ballot accounting charts, packing slips, invoices, whatever we could get that would help us ascertain whether or not the vote count was correct. The clearest example I can give you as to why a recount of the ballots is not sufficient is this. If you do not examine the voter signature books and the absentee voter lists and the provisional voter lists, how do you know if you're looking at the right number of ballots? How do you know if ballot box stuffing or ballot destruction has taken place? You can recount the votes and they can match the official results, but you might have the wrong number of ballots altogether. So we wanted to see it all. And we audited red counties and we audited blue counties. We did not find red counties rigged for Bush and blue counties rigged for Kerry. We found red counties and blue counties rigged for George W. Bush and other counties not rigged at all. The only cases I found of George Bush losing votes that were rightly his were clearly in error and not attributable to fraud. So I will start with blue counties and then go on to red counties, and we should turn the lights down probably so we can see some of the photographs of actual evidence from Ohio. Oh, okay.
Is that dark enough?
Probably darker still. Let's see. Computer screen. We can try it and find. Oh, you got to do this first. Right. Let's try that. Here we go. So is that plainly visible? Yeah, I thought so. These are punch card ballots from Cleveland. And this will answer the question as to how so many Kerry votes ended up in the columns of other candidates. In Cleveland and in other large cities in Ohio, there were many polling places where multiple precincts voted in the same building. And in Ohio, by law, the sequence, the order in which candidates' names appear on the ballot must rotate from precinct to precinct. This is all in the name of fairness, because it is alleged that a large number of voters are so lazy or so stupid that they do not read through the whole list of candidates and vote for the first person listed, apparently even in a presidential election. So they want to give every candidate an equal chance of being listed first on the ballot, and rather than rotate it from county to county, they rotate it from precinct to precinct. If you will notice, there are no names on the punch cards, only numbers, and there are perforated rectangles that you punch through with what they call a stylus. It looks like a ballpoint pen. The names appear on a booklet that's attached to the punch card machines with great big letters and numbers and arrows pointing to the location you're supposed to punch for that candidate. Now, in this polling place, John Kerry was in position number 2 in one of the precincts and in position number 6 in the other precinct. In this precinct, he was in position number 2. And if you took your ballot to the wrong voting booth, probably because it was the shortest line, Kerry was in position number 6. When you punched number 6 and then brought that ballot to your correct ballot box, that vote was counted for Michael Peroutka. He got 215 votes in this precinct. In the same polling place, in the other precinct, where Kerry was in position number 6, if you brought your ballot to the wrong voting booth and punched number 2, which it said to do if you were wanting to vote for Kerry, then you put the ballot in the correct ballot box, your vote went to Michael Badnarik. He got 178 votes in this precinct. And it wasn't just Badnarik and Peroutka. Those are just the ones I could see in the precinct results. Kerry votes also went to the other candidates. Toward the end of our investigation of the ballots themselves, we were focused on why so many votes had not been counted for president. Many of them were ballots that were punched for candidate disqualified, who used to be Ralph Nader before the courts took him off the ballot for having out-of-state residents carry his petitions. In this polling place, there were 2 precincts. Kerry was in position number 8 in one of them and in position number 10 in the other. In this precinct, he was in position number 8, and if you took your ballot to the wrong voting booth and punched number 10, your vote would go to Nader and disappear into the black hole because the tabulators were programmed to count Nader's total as 0, and the only way to find out if Kerry was losing votes into this black hole was to look at the ballots themselves. Now, the way the rotation worked was it was alphabetical order in the first precinct, and then the second precinct on the list, the guy on the top goes to the bottom, everybody moves up 1. There were 5 candidates, only 5 possible rotations. So it was in the first precinct, Badnarik, Bush, Kerry, Nader, Peroutka. So Kerry's located between Bush and Nader. So if voters from this precinct go to that one, and 80 Kerry votes go to Nader, then if voters from that precinct go to this one, you would expect maybe 80 Kerry votes to go to Bush, and that's exactly what we found in this polling place. How do I know Bush didn't earn those votes? Because I examined the absentee ballots, and there were only 2 of them punched for Bush in the privacy of people's homes where they couldn't take their ballot to the wrong voting booth. It wasn't easy to look at the absentee ballots. They don't count them at the precinct level in Cleveland. They throw them in a big box according to which congressional, state senate, and state assembly district you're in. So I had to paw through about 4,000 ballots under the watchful eye of a Republican and a Democrat, which is as it should be. They had custody of the evidence, and pull out the absentee ballots marked on the back for precinct 6L and 6M and 12 others that I got through before the deputy director saw what I was doing and went absolutely ballistic and ordered them not to let me touch any absentee ballots ever again. But it wasn't just Cleveland. Here's some ballots in Akron, the same story, where, okay, well, here's the other precinct where we saw where Kerry's actually in position number 10. If you go to the wrong precinct and punch for 8, you're actually going to have your vote counted for Bush. We saw the same thing happen in Akron. These are all votes for candidate disqualified, that is Ralph Nader. He got 66 votes in this precinct. And it wasn't always by accident. This is a pink memo sheet from the voter signature books in Cleveland, where poll workers write down unusual occurrences. This one says 11 o'clock, inspector override, vote at any vacant booth. 4 o'clock, inspector came back, instructed voter to vote at precinct. There were no roving inspectors authorized to go from place to place in Cleveland and override trained precinct judges to make sure that they would allow voters to go to the wrong voting booth. We do not know who this person was or who hired him, or for that matter, his party affiliation. There was one other way that these multiple precinct polling places were used to result in lost votes for John Kerry. Each precinct had its own table, and if there was nobody at the door to guide you to the right line and you got in the wrong line, maybe because it was the shortest line, and you got up to the table and found that you were not on the voter rolls, they might tell you, oh, you're in the wrong precinct. You need to go to the back of the line over there and start and stand in line for another hour and then vote. Or they might hand you a provisional ballot, and then it doesn't count because you're in the wrong precinct. You're in the right building, but at the wrong table, so your vote doesn't count. This was the principal reason why provisional ballots were rejected in many counties in Ohio, including Cuyahoga County, the #1 Democratic stronghold where more than 30% of the provisional ballots were rejected, and Lucas County, where Toledo is located, the #2 Democratic stronghold in Ohio, where more than 40% of the provisional ballots were rejected. Now, why did so many ballots cast on punch cards have no vote recorded for president? And why were these votes coming disproportionately from blue counties, especially from precincts that had voted overwhelmingly for Kerry? People assumed it was hanging chads. I was the one who actually wanted to look at the evidence. That wasn't the reason. We photographed about 20 hanging chads in the 8 urban counties that we audited. Rather, more than half, in some counties 2/3 of the ballots not counted as votes for president had 2 or more punches. There'd be a punch for a major party candidate and a punch for a minor party candidate. A punch for Kerry or for Bush, but usually for Kerry because these were heavily Democratic precincts. And a punch for Michael Badnarik or Michael Peroutka, or both of them. I found it very difficult to believe that so many voters made the same mistakes, 2 mistakes, 6, 8, 10, 12% of the voters in some precincts, who punched for Kerry, and then they punched for another candidate for president, not even knowing which office they were voting for, and were punching for a candidate they never heard of. There are complaints from voters who swear that they were given punch cards already punched out for president. Now, this couldn't be done by the boards of elections. They didn't have the opportunity. Punch card ballots arrive at the boards of elections in shrink-wrap pads of 100 or more, and they're passed on to the polling places in the same way. Any pre-punching of ballots had to have been done at the factory or somewhere else before the ballots arrive at the Board of Elections, which could explain why we found the same thing in so many counties. Here's double punches in Akron, 2 punches in the left-hand column for president. These are from Dayton, Ohio, 2 punches in the left-hand column for president, for Kerry and for a third-party candidate. And by the way, these ballots no longer exist. Montgomery County, Ohio was the only county that destroyed all of its ballots even after receiving a federal court order not to do so, and no, they're not in jail. Here are ballots from Warren City in Trumbull County with 2 or more punches in the first column. Here are punches in Canton City in Stark County, Ohio, with 2 or more punches in the first column. Except for this one. This, by the way, is a remake. Boards of elections in Ohio are allowed to remake ballots that they don't feel are being read properly by the optical scanner or the punch card tabulator. They are supposed to number those ballots and number the spoiled ballots they are allegedly duplicating so that you can match them up later and make sure it was done correctly. Not one county in Ohio could produce for us the spoiled ballots they were allegedly duplicating. I'm not clear why this need to be remade. There's no punches on it. This voter punched for nobody at all and they had to remake his ballot? Well, there are 3 punches down here that appear on every ballot in every precinct in every county, every punch card county in the state of Ohio. These punches signify absolutely nothing. They don't signify the precinct. There's no punches on these cards to tell the tabulator which precinct is being counted. You have to trust the Board of Elections to keep the stacks straight. More on that later. But it would serve to obfuscate an extra punch in the presidential column. All the ballots in Ohio were pre-punched. Some of them had 4 punches and most of them had 3. How many people would examine their ballots beforehand and even know what the punches mean? People examine them afterward looking for hanging chads. They didn't examine them before except for a handful of voters who filed complaints. Now, if you're going to rig an election for a Republican candidate, you can't use the same methods in a red county that you would use in a blue county. If you're going to pre-punch the ballots, then Bush will be the net loser of votes. If you're going to allow voters to go to the wrong voting booth, then Bush is going to be the net loser of votes. So there were different methods that had to be used. Ballot alteration, ballot box stuffing, you'll see evidence of these. Here's a ballot from Miami County, Ohio. This is not the same hand as these. This is an undervote for president turned into a vote for Bush. We saw quite a few of these in a county where we didn't audit very many ballots because these are optical scan ballots. They're on ledger-sized pages. We can only fit 2 on a photo. And we got to photograph both sides, so it's really time-consuming to audit the ballots for a single precinct. But we did audit all the ballots that were hand-counted in the recount staged in December and found these. These were ballots that were in the precincts chosen to be hand-counted. Now, the way that worked, the Democrats didn't contest this election. It was the Green and Libertarian parties who paid to have a recount in Ohio, and they didn't get what they paid for. They wanted a hand count of the whole state. Instead, what they got was, county by county, a recount of ballots amounting to 3% of the total ballots cast in precincts chosen allegedly at random in full public view by the boards of elections. But in fact, in many cases, the precincts were not chosen at random. And we found ballots like these in the hand-counted precincts. And we also found 570 remakes in a box dated December 16th. That would be recount remakes. These weren't even remakes done for election night. These were remakes done to try to get the hand count to match the tabulator count in the 3% of the ballots that were being counted in full public view. Because if a hand count failed to match the official results, the counties were supposed to hand count all the ballots in the county. So there's 570 remakes, many of them in these 3% that were hand counted. And still, the count didn't match the official results. So J. Kenneth Blackwell dispatched one of his operatives to Miami County to interpret election law for them. And he said, oh, it doesn't matter that the hand count doesn't match the official results. It only has to match today's tabulator count. This is an exercise in hand counting, not an actual recount of the presidential election. So that's how they passed muster in Miami County. Now, Miami County had the lowest percentage of undervotes for president of any 88 counties in Ohio, and this would be one of the reasons why. Undervotes turned into votes for George W. Bush. We didn't see any of these turned into votes for Kerry. Now, I'll show you what we did to audit Miami County, where the big question was turnout. This is where they had what a national magazine called a Saddam Hussein-like turnout of 98.55% in one of their precincts. Now, here's a ballot accounting chart from one of the Miami County precincts, and this is one thing you should look at if you're going to audit an election. The poll books or signature books are supposed to have charts where they say this is the number of ballots received at the start of the day. And then they account for all the ballots. The total number of the regular ballots, the ballots voted on by the voters, plus the number of provisional ballots or walk-in ballots, plus the number of spoiled ballots where the voter makes a mistake and asks for a new one, plus the number of unused ballots are supposed to total the amount you started with. It's basic arithmetic. And in this precinct they do. They all total up to 1,075. Now notice the number of walk-in ballots counted. That means provisional ballots. That's 0, null. Well, this is Bethel South Central. Here's the provisional ballot statistics by precinct for Bethel South Central. 17 provisional ballots approved. There were none cast at the polls. Where did these come from? 10 of them were, in fact, from out of county. Inter-county provisional ballots. Clark, Montgomery, Shelby. There were hundreds of these in Miami County. Provisional ballots cast by voters who didn't even live in the county. And they were counted. In this case, all but one of them. This one was rejected because it wasn't even registered in the, well, no, it's this one, because it wasn't even registered in the other county that he lived in. So they did reject that one. So you have hundreds of provisional ballots approved from out-of-county voters in Miami County, and even 2 from voters who were registered out of state. They counted a provisional ballot from somebody registered in Florida and from somebody registered in New York City. Now, mind you, in a blue county, if you're in the right building but at the wrong table, your provisional ballot doesn't count. I guess it's better to be in the wrong county altogether and to go to a red county to vote. In fact, in Franklin County, your provisional ballot was rejected in Columbus even if you were in the right precinct, because the Board of Elections ruled that, well, you should have voted on the machine. You shouldn't have voted provisionally, as if anybody wants to vote provisionally. So this is not equal protection under the law. We need the same rules in red counties as in blue counties. Notice, too, it says no stubs. Paper ballots come with strips of papers called stubs that are perforated. They've got numbers written on them. The poll workers are supposed to write the stub number next to your name in the voter's signature book, and then they tear the stub off when you put your ballot in the box to protect your right to a secret ballot. The number's not on the ballot, it's only on the stub. And then, if somebody goes and recounts the ballots or audits the precinct, the numbers on the torn-off stubs that are put in a box are supposed to match the numbers in the voter signature book, and the numbers on the stubs still attached to the unused ballots are supposed to not match the numbers in the signature book, and that's the only way that you know that the ballots you're looking at are the ones that were handed to the voters. Otherwise, you don't know if ballot substitution has taken place. So if you don't keep the stubs, or don't record the stub numbers, or don't keep the unused ballots, you can't verify your results. And in this precinct and in several others in Miami County, there were no ballot stubs. I guess they were just thrown away. Here's another ballot accounting chart. So they started the day with 445 ballots, and another 99 turn up from somewhere in the middle of the day. I picked this precinct because I was guessing there were about 100 extra votes for Bush compared to the 2000 election, because there was hardly any population increase in any town in Miami County. Well, I asked about this. You know, the turnout seemed awfully high here and in Concord Southwest with a 98.55%. And the story we were told was this: the boards of elections held back some ballots on election day because some people didn't know where they're supposed to vote. And then when some of the precincts were in danger of running out of ballots due to very high turnout, teams of volunteer Boy Scouts were dispatched to deliver the ballots, and those darn Boy Scouts must have brought the wrong ballots to the wrong precincts. Well, I examined the ballot stub numbers in the poll books that actually had them and discovered this isn't where the extra ballots came from. They actually came from other precincts in the same polling place, or else I couldn't even figure out where they came from. But you know, if the Boy Scouts were really the culprits in Concord Township and delivered and confused ballots for Concord Southwest with another precinct, they didn't all vote in the same building. They must have confused a Nazarene church with a United Auto Workers meeting hall. So, you know, I have to conclude that it wasn't the Boy Scouts who rigged the election. Now, if you'll notice here, it says one spoiled ballot. Spoiled and defaced. That means a voter spoiled his ballot, went to the desk, asked for a new one. So what they do is they cross off the stub number and they write in a new one because the voters asked for another ballot. So there should be one stub number crossed out in the signature book. Well, on this page alone, there's 4. There's 2 of them crossed out here. There's 1 of them changed here. There's 1 of them changed here. There are more than 20 of them in this voter signature book. Well, if there's only 1 spoiled ballot, why are they crossing out stub numbers? They can't prove to me that the ballots I'm photographing are in fact the ballots that were issued to the voters. Here's another precinct in Miami County. Now, this is Tipp City, stands for Tippecanoe, Precinct F. Now, let's see. How many ballots were delivered? Was it 550 or was it 630? How many ballots were counted? Was it 505 or 390 or 496? I mean, those numbers aren't even close. I picked this precinct because I guessed there were about 110 extra votes for Bush compared to the 2000 election. Well, looks like there were. Here's 390 ballots from Tipp City Precinct F. The poll workers are supposed to explain any discrepancies in the numbers, and bless his heart, this one did. He said another 106 ballots from another precinct, from Tipp City J, were put in this ballot box by orders of Kelly Gillis. Well, that's 106 extra ballots. Well, we checked into it a little bit. Whoops. Here's the voter signature book for Tipp City J. And there were 106 voters who didn't get to sign the book. It says Tipp F. They're told to vote out a precinct. If you'll notice, and we found about 50 cases like this appears to be a married couple, the same surname, the same address, and they're told to vote in different precincts. I mean, I didn't know who did the redistricting, but it looked like they drew the precinct boundary right down the middle of the bedroom. Now, here's what they were forced to do. There's 3 pages of scrap paper that have the 106 per Kelly Gillis voters. Here's their names, here's their addresses, here's their signatures. They weren't allowed to sign the signature books. So naturally, we decided to canvass the precinct and ask these voters what happened. We went to houses where they had the divided couples. One voted in Tipp City F, one voted in Tipp City J. They all told us the same story. During the day, somebody came into the polling place at Tipp City J and said, the lines are really long. We're going to take the first half of the alphabet and you come with us. And they marched these voters like cattle across the street and down the road to the wrong polling place. And these people did not get to put their ballots in the box. They were told to hand them to the poll workers. Now, some of these voters were still upset 2.5 years later. One of them was in tears as she described the ordeal. She said, "I didn't stand in line for an hour and a half to have my vote not count. I knew this isn't where I was supposed to be voting." Well, here's a little more evidence from these two precincts. Here's the voter signature book from Tip City F, the precinct from which the voters were herded up like cattle or precinct to which, rather, the voters were herded up like cattle and marched to. There are no stub numbers recorded anywhere in the signature book, so they cannot verify to me that the ballots that I photographed were the ballots that were handed to the voters. In fact, I had learned by then to be careful to keep the ballots in the sequence in which I found them so as not to compromise the evidence. And I found a distinct and abrupt change in the voting patterns partway through the stack of ballots, especially when you separate out, not physically, but by data, separate out the ballots marked for Bush. Here is the, whoops, I went backward. Here is the ballot accounting chart for Tip City J, the precinct from which the voters were herded up like cattle and marched away, and there is no attempt to account for the ballots. They just said they had 1,180 ballots delivered at the start of the day, and that's all they could account for. Here's the ballot accounting chart for Concord Southwest, where 679 out of 689 registered voters allegedly voted. So why did they need 980 ballots? Question mark, question mark. Almost 300 more than the number of registered voters. Notice they say there was only 461 ballots cast at the polls, not 679, though that would include absentees. Whoops, did it again. Here's the voter signature book for Concord Southwest. You can photograph 2 pages at once. On these 2 pages alone, there's 13 blanks in a precinct where all but 10 people voted. This is one of the photographs I submitted to Judge Marbley in a bid to protect the surviving ballots from destruction, which he obliged. There's a little rain damage here, too. I'll explain that. The ballots are supposed to be kept in a dry place in a double-locked vault, but Miami County put them in the powerhouse across the street from the county office building, and the roof caved in, and the pouring rain soaked all the election records, and they had to drag the boxes to another side of the building, left them stacked up willy-nilly. This is how we found the ballots for Concord Southwest with the 98.55% turnout, and it seems like they weren't even clear which Concord precinct this was. And just for fun, to show you the rain damage, here is the ballot at the top of the stack. Now, we photographed every poll book in this county and compared the number of regular, absentee, and provisional voters to the official results. And we found that the official turnout numbers were wrong, not just for the 98.55% precinct, but for all 82 precincts in Miami County. Now, the day that I submitted my records request, the deputy director, a registered Democrat, coincidentally resigned. The director, a registered Republican and a former military intelligence operative, turned out to be the most transparent and cooperative official we encountered in the whole state of Ohio. He not only gave us free, unfettered access to the records, but he helped with the investigation. he commanded his computerized database of voter histories to tell him how many voters, precinct by precinct, who were still registered in 2006, were in fact registered in November 2004, and if they voted. It doesn't tell them how they voted, but it tells them if they voted. And we walked in one day, and the first words Steve Quillen told us were, "You guys are right." And he handed us a printout showing that the official turnout was wrong in all 82 precincts in Miami County. This was one of the counties where Kerry got fewer votes than Connolly. Whoops. Here's another one. This is Darke County. You got to love the name. Here's what the ballots are supposed to look like. These are absentee ballots, so the Board of Elections orders them all in a bunch, and they write in the name of the precinct on the back side, presumably before they mail it to the voter, rather than being able to put it in the desired precinct. And they're supposed to have the year and the county and the facsimile signatures of the Board of Elections by law. What are these? There's nothing printed on the back side. These are blank ballots, wild card ballots that could be used on an as-needed basis in any county to stuff the ballot box. We audited 9 Connolly anomaly precincts in this county and photographed 70 more ballots than the number issued to the voters. More ballots than the number issued to the voters. Some of these ballots were never touched by voters, and if some of the ballots are fake, how do we know that any of the ballots are real? In Mercer County, the ballots looked different from every other county, which is why you need to audit several counties. First of all, it was the only county we audited in Ohio where the county name and the year was printed with a dot matrix printer. The lines actually slant a little downhill. There's 5 signatures instead of 4. And if you look carefully at this one, this is a Board of Elections member named Owen V. Hall. The first letter of his name is cut off on a line that curves upward to the left as if done by scissors, and the first 2 letters of somebody else's name are sticking out to the left. They all look like this in the whole county. It looks like they're made from a cut and taped original. I have a really difficult time believing these ballots were manufactured by Dayton Legal Blank, the official printer in Dayton. I do remember, these are absentee ballots. I remember the count in this precinct among absentee voters. It was Bush 79, Kerry 6. But somehow Ellen Connolly got 22 votes. There were extra, in Mercer and Van Wert counties, there were more ballots photographed than the total number issued to the voters as well. And now we come to Claremont County. This is the 4th Connolly anomaly county where there were more ballots photographed than the total number issued to the voter in nearly every precinct audited, at least in the machine-counted precincts. This is the favorite method of altering ballots in Claremont County. You can't see it very well in this photo, but there's a white sticker there over the mark for Kerry and the mark for Bush filled in. After we got an order from Judge Marbley to protect the ballots from destruction, Secretary of State Jennifer Brunner, successor to J. Kenneth Blackwell, took custody of the ballots, and we were allowed to put this very ballot on a window to serve as a light table, which altered the color of the ballot. But here it is. You can see the mark for Kerry behind the sticker and the mark for Bush filled in a distinctly darker writing implement than used for the other marks. Now, these are indeed votes for Republican candidates, but the full ballot, which I showed a moment ago, shows votes for all three Democratic candidates for the Supreme Court, Ellen Connolly, Nancy First, and William O'Neill. So this is a voter who split their ticket. Now, the observers to the recount in December observed many of these stickered ballots. 3 witnesses for the Green, Libertarian, and Democratic parties wrote out sworn affidavits and confronted the Board of Elections about it 3 times. At the second meeting, one of the witnesses, Bob Drake, with whom I've talked many times, was taken aside by an employee of the Board of Elections who asked him to help her carry boxes upstairs, and the reason was to get him alone so she could tell him what happened. She said that on election night, Danny Baer, the director of the Board of Elections and a registered Republican, sent the deputy director, a registered Democrat, home sick, and was all alone with the ballots and came downstairs with a box full of stickered ballots, and the Board of Elections personnel were so frightened of this man they didn't know what to do. At the third confrontation, Danny Baer, I am told, actually admitted attaching these stickers himself, and I've met 2 of the witnesses. By the time we got there with cameras, this was the only surviving stickered presidential ballot. The likely explanation is that the Board of Elections had made pristine remakes by dipping into their stash of unused ballots, which would then explain why they had to destroy their unused ballots, because they didn't have enough of them to withstand an audit. They also didn't keep the stubs, but it didn't matter anyway because they never recorded the stub numbers in any of their signature books. We had quite a difficult time getting to use cameras. There was an array of assistant county prosecutors lined up against us, held us at bay for 79 days, wanting us to accept photocopies, and I said, no, that won't do. We know about the stickered ballots. We don't want a photocopy of a white sticker on a black and white ballot. We want true color photos. And, well, a deputy, or rather, assistant county prosecutor told me, well, there really weren't very many of them. So I asked her, how many would that be? And she sent me a letter in writing saying there were fewer than 100. That would be, of course, in the precincts amounting to 3% of the vote that were actually observed during the hand count. So there could have been 3,000 in the county. So I told her, ma'am, that would be fewer than 100 felonies, and that's why we need to use cameras. Now, I learned long ago when seeking incriminating confessions never to ask whether, but to ask how many, how much, how often. I just couldn't believe an assistant county prosecutor had fallen into that trap. Here's another altered ballot from Claremont County. Here's a carry vote turned into an overvote for president by a mark clearly not that of the voter, just smearing in a mark for Michael Badnarik for president. Now it doesn't count. But then here's another, I keep pushing the wrong button. Here's another overvote for president. This one has Bush and Nader marked in, a curious combination. We found several of these, and the observers to the recount saw them too. These were counted for Bush. Yeah. The observers noticed this, and they said, how come some overvotes are overvotes and others are counted for Bush? Well, here's why. They weren't supposed to have Ralph Nader's name on the ballot. He'd been taken off the ballot by the courts. So they listed him anyway in Claremont County, which would be more likely to draw votes from Kerry than from Bush. But instead of programming their optical scanner to report a count of 0, as the punch card tabulators were programmed to do, they programmed their optical scanners not to even be able to recognize a mark for Nader. And then they could fill it in for Bush. We didn't see any Kerry and Nader overvotes. They were always Bush and Nader. And what disturbs me about this is the proof that you can program an optical scanner not to recognize a vote for a candidate? Couldn't you then program it not to recognize a fraction of votes for the candidate? This is why we need paper ballots counted by hand at the polling place in full public view on election night, no matter how long it takes. The minute those ballots leave the polling place, the opportunity arises for ballot alteration, ballot substitution, ballot box stuffing, and ballot destruction, all of which we documented in Ohio. A quick look at some of the voter signature books. Oh, no, first of all, they didn't pick the precincts to be hand counted at random in Claremont County. This is a memo dated December 10th, 4 days before the recount, already announcing the precincts that have been chosen for a hand count. They picked the smallest precincts in the county because they were the easiest ones to get the numbers to match. But they didn't just pick them on December 10th. They knew on Election Day which precincts were going to be hand counted, and here's how I know. These are absentee ballots for precincts that were machine counted on Election Day. We audited 6 of these large precincts. The absentee ballots look just like the regular ballots, except they have a notation. A little red rubber-stamped smiley face in the upper right-hand corner. Have a nice day. These are what the absentee ballots looked like in the 3% of the precincts, or precincts amounting to 3% of the votes, that were hand counted in full public view on December the 14th. They are denoted in the upper right-hand corner with a handwritten A. We saw these in every one of the hand-counted precincts and no others. Now, why would they be marked differently? The regular ballots and the absentee ballots are mixed up together on election night and run through the scanners. They knew on Election Day which precincts would be subjected to public scrutiny in December if it should come to a recount in Ohio, and they could leave those precincts unmolested and rig the rest. It is suspected that other counties in Ohio did the same thing. This is the only county where I can prove it. And this could be why, in this heavily Republican county, Kerry got 33% of the vote in the hand-counted precincts and 23% of the vote in the machine-counted precincts that we audited. Now, in every one of the machine-counted precincts that we audited, at least the ones where we actually had all the ballots, we photographed more of these absentee ballots with the rubber stamps than the total number of absentee ballots issued to the voters. And their signature books don't tell us which absentee ballots were returned in a timely manner and counted. So even if all the absentee ballots were returned in a timely manner by the voters, there were too many of them, sometimes 24 extras. That's called ballot box stuffing. And it was actually the 5th Connolly Anomaly County where we saw it. Here's a few photographs from voter signature books in Claremont County. I'm not a handwriting expert, but does that look like a match to you? These are the signatures of record. These are the signatures of the voters, allegedly. Here's another one. Does that look like a match to you? Here's another one. This is all the same precinct, by the way, just for fun. How about this one? Does that look like a match? Her name is Allison, not Alan. Here's another one. How about this? James Taylor. That doesn't quite look like a match to me either. Now, I don't know that voters did this. I mean, we have no idea where these signatures were actually done. But, you know, there were more ballots photographed than the total number issued to the voters, even if all the signatures are legitimate. And some of them clearly are not. Now, right. Bush owes his entire margin of victory to Butler, Claremont, and Warren counties in southwestern Ohio. His biggest margin was in Butler County, which used punch cards. He carried it 2-1. His margin was about 54,000 votes. When we were photographing punch card ballots, which we were allowed to handle ourselves under the watchful eye of Board of Elections employees, a ranking member of the Board of Elections, or employee, administrative assistant named Lori Davis, volunteered this information to us. She said, the punch cards have always worked well for us. The tabulators have always worked well in the past. We have always done our own programming. But for some reason, on the morning of Election Day, a technician from the ES&S voting machine company showed up unannounced at the Board of Elections office and reprogrammed all 6 of our tabulators. Now, this could be why a count of the photographed ballots fails to match the tabulator count in any precinct audited. And in about half the cases, more than half, the disparity in one manner or another amounted to 25 votes or 50 votes, exactly, or plus or minus 1 or 2. Which tells me that the tabulators might have been rigged the way they used to rig the lever machines in Detroit if nobody was there at the start of the day to look at them and make sure all the candidates started at 0. You start your guy at plus 25 and the other guy at minus 25. Or your guy at 50 and the other guy at minus 50. And then the total ballots cast comes out right, and nobody's the wiser unless some upstart band of citizen volunteers wants to actually look at the ballots. In which case you then have to go into the ballot room and rig the ballots to get them to match the rigged tabulator count. And the clearest example, the clearest indication that this happened is this. In one of those precincts, here's what we found. There were 50 consecutive ballots for Bush at the top of the deck and 212 consecutive ballots for Bush in the middle of the deck. That is not the sequence in which these ballots were dropped into the box on election night by the voters. It proves ballot tampering and unauthorized access to the ballots, and here's what it indicates. If you're going to take 50 ballots marked for Kerry out of the middle of the deck somewhere in a heavily Republican precinct, you're going to leave way more than 50 consecutive ballots for Bush behind. And then you replace them with 50 ballots for Bush and you put them on the top of the deck, and if you forget to shuffle the cards, as they would know to do in any crooked Las Vegas casino if they were going to put extra face cards in the deck, you leave the telltale evidence behind. So that was the most egregious example in Butler County. And in fact, I remember in one of those townships, when we looked at the 2004 census data that was actually broken down by age group, you couldn't account for the total number of ballots cast unless 98% of the adult population, 18 and over, actually cast ballots. You couldn't account for the number of registered voters, even if everybody 15 years of age and older was registered, and this in a county that purged their voter rolls twice. Now, we saw the same thing in Delaware County, but I should tell you a couple of other stories about them first. Delaware County first came to my attention. They're right north of Columbus. First came to my attention because there was a 45% increase in ballots cast. In other words, for every 100 people who voted in the 2000 presidential election, Bush versus Gore, there were 145 who voted in November 2004, Bush versus Kerry. a 45% increase in turnout. Now, yes, it was the fastest growing county in the state, but not that fast. So I asked the Board of Elections for the names of the purged voters. They said, we don't have that. Once they're purged from the database, they're just gone. We have no record that they ever registered. I thought that was convenient. So I asked them, can you give me the numbers who were purged? And this they did. They had a purge before the 2004 election and after. So I constructed a timeline, something I had learned to do from watching the television show Without a Trace. If the timeline doesn't work, somebody is lying. And I wrote up a timeline of the number of officially registered voters for every primary and every general election from 2000 onward and factored in the purges of the voter rolls. And I went back to Kim and Janet, the director and deputy director of the Board of Elections. I said, okay, y'all had 78,000 registered voters in April of 2004 after the purge. 78,000. And you had 100,000 registered voters by the October deadline. I want the names. I know you have them because they're still on the rolls. So Kim gave me a spreadsheet that fell 6,000 names short. They could not account for these 100,000 registered voters they claimed they had. And they claimed that 81,000 of them had voted, 81% turnout, when in fact they only had 93,000 voters or 94,000. So they're actually claiming an 87% turnout, which is just not possible countywide. So we naturally wanted to look at the ballots. They were quite annoyed. I remember on the first day they asked us why we wanted to look at the ballots. I said, well, I found the election results surprising. There had to be at least 3,000 people who voted for gay marriage and for George Bush. And probably twice as many. Because obviously some Kerry voters voted to ban gay marriage. It got 61% of the vote statewide. Well, I guess they knew about this anomaly because Kim and Janet gave us 3 explanations almost in unison as if rehearsed. They both said they have family members who are gay and proceeded to identify them. I thought, this is inappropriate. Gay people should get to decide for themselves whether to reveal their sexual orientation and shouldn't be outed by their own family members in front of total strangers at the county office building. So then they said that there's a large gay contingent on the Delaware campus. Well, that would be Ohio Wesleyan Methodist University. And then they said that all the Delaware shop owners are gay. All of them? Yes, all of them. Oh, I did not know that. Yes, all of them. They told us this 3 times. So, we take the official explanations seriously, and so we canvassed the stores downtown and asked, is it true all the shop owners are gay? Some of my favorite responses, the guy at the Sherwin-Williams store just said, well, I'm just the manager, I'm not the owner. And we went to the taxi cab company. We figured surely they'd know. They drive people around wee hours of the morning, and they've been in business 110 years. They told us, quote, Delaware is not a gay mecca. So I then went to the Visitors Bureau posing as a gay urban professional and said, we just drove up from Columbus along the River Road, and we think it's really beautiful, and we're thinking about moving here, and we want brochures on gay-owned and operated restaurants, bed and breakfasts, and campgrounds. Well, they wanted to know why on earth we thought they'd have that. And I said, well, we have it on good authority from the Board of Elections that there's a large gay community in Delaware County. And they said, who told you that? We said, well, Kim and Janet. The Visitors Bureau couldn't even refer us to one business that flies a rainbow flag. So I began to suspect that the story was not true, that Delaware had no large gay population, that the election results were fraudulent. So we go back to the Board of Elections still wanting to look at ballots, and they are really not amused. Not once, not twice, but 5 times they called out armed, uniformed paramilitary policemen to try to stop us from looking at the ballots. I'm not easily intimidated. I walked up to the guy, I looked at his shoulder patch to find out who he's working for. It said Global Security Services. I went back to the office, ran a web search. Their web page boasts that they are comprised of former Secret Service, FBI, CIA, and special military operatives such as Navy SEALs. That's who the Delaware County Board of Elections felt was needed to protect them from the likes of us wanting to look at public records. One of my friends told me, Richard, they're not worried about you. Here's how we knew. We showed up one day after a week's absence, and one of these Global Security Services uniformed officers was staking out the building. I guess he'd been there for a week. We pull up in our van, he sees us, he takes off, runs into the building, and I chase him. I'm chasing an armed uniformed paramilitary policeman through the corridors of the county office building. Chased him around the corner, or I watched him duck into the Board of Elections office and lock the door behind him during business hours, and I saw Kim Spangler, the director of the Board of Elections, scurry across the floor, duck into her office, and crouch beneath her window in hopes I hadn't seen her. Behavior indicative of someone with something to hide. By the way, this is the county that went to court to try to stop the recount in December 2004, and it was the Democrats who led the charge. Now, when I got back to the office, my friend said, this guy's not worried about you. He's a lookout. They're tampering with the ballots. They're making you submit public records requests in advance with the precinct specified. You're going to have to figure out a way to get a look at precincts without advance notice. I don't know how you're going to do it. And you ought to find out if they ordered new ballots from Dayton Legal Blank. Maybe the telephone records would be a clue. So, yeah, I obtained the telephone records, and 10 minutes after that incident with the officer locking the door, as soon as he opened the door when the coast was clear, we submitted another records request, and they faxed it to Dayton Legal Blank 10 minutes later. Well, we did get a look at one precinct that was named in advance, and they were actually on their best behavior that day, possibly because we were accompanied by Jeff Kirkby sporting a legitimate White House press pass. And when we were done, Kim told me I could come back after the spring primary and look at more ballots. So I went back to the Adirondacks in New York for my annual stint on the trail crew, returned to Ohio in June, called up Kim and said, remember you said I could look at more ballots? She said, yeah, sure, but we don't like those people you were with. Could you please resubmit your records request over your name only? We like you. We want to deal with you. I said, oh, sure, Kim. How much time do you need? She said, give us 24 hours. I said, fine. How about tomorrow? I resubmitted my records request, faxed it in, carefully copying and pasting the townships, and changed all the precincts. And the next morning, I'm in there with Stuart Wright and a kindly, gentle, elderly man they couldn't possibly object to, and there on the desk are 3 decks of cards for Genoa Township Precinct I, and they were all sorted according to presidential candidate. Just like in Butler County, these were not precincts that were hand-counted in December. There was no reason to sort them by hand. I had Stuart write them out. You'd see the first line here, number 4 is Bush. Those are the absentee ballots at the top. First, all the absentee ballots for Bush, and then all for Kerry. We'd switch to a new line when the candidate would switch. The first deck of cards is pretty well sorted among the regular ballots. The second deck of cards has all the Kerry ballots on the top and all the Bush ballots on the bottom. The third deck of cards has a hot pink remake, 3 absentee ballots, 2 of them for Nader, 1 for Bush. I'd gotten the wrong deck somehow. And the rest of it, 359 consecutive ballots for George W. Bush, not a ballot for Kerry in the deck. This is not the sequence in which the voters lined up at the polls on Election Day. Well, I did consider the possibility that maybe there'd been a tent revival in Genoa Township that night, and 9 busloads of rural Christians, of which I am one, went to the polls all after the last Kerry voter had voted, but then they all would have had to be registered in the same precinct, and exactly 100 of these 359 consecutive ballots for Bush were punched for gay marriage. So I was forced to conclude that this was ballot tampering, and I have one more county to tell you about. Warren County, Ohio, may have come to your attention before. County officials staged a phony Homeland Security alert claiming a terrorist threat on election night, locked down the county building, and no unwanted observers and no press reporters were allowed to watch the ballots being counted. They said it was level 10. You know, I've heard of code orange, code purple, code pink, whatever they are, but, you know, not level 10. The story was broken by a reporter from the Cincinnati Enquirer, fresh out of college, named Erica Solvig. She noted that the election results had still not been reported at midnight, so she drove up to find out why and found the county office building surrounded by police cars and bomb-sniffing dogs. So she investigated. Apparently the only reporter who did. I mean, don't you think this is a story? A terrorist threat is a story. A hoax is a story. Either way, it's a story. But only one reporter talks about it. And there were other reporters there who were locked out. So, she calls the principals of the elementary schools, two of them that are about a stone's throw from the county office building. They hadn't been informed of any terrorist threat. She called the FBI, the state police. They weren't aware of any terrorist threat in any county in Ohio. She obtained emails dated 8 and 7 days before the election, back and forth between two county officials, the directors of building services and emergency services, planning the lockdown in advance. Even the wording to be printed on the signs to be posted on the building on election night. A county commissioner told her that the commission approved the lockdown behind closed doors 5 days before the election. I found out from interviewing the director of the Board of Elections that the board knew about it a couple of days in advance, that the building would be locked down as soon as the polls closed. And ladies and gentlemen, there is a word for this sort of behavior. It is called conspiracy. We have witnesses, including one who drew this hand-drawn map showing the layout of the buildings. He said that ballots were carried from the polling places up Justice Drive and up a driveway and into a parking lot where they were brought to the building services storage facility under the control of the director of building services, one of the co-conspirators who planned this out in emails, and they were held there for 3 or 4 hours while ballot tampering occurred. And then they were brought through a loading dock in the northeast corner of the county building and up to the 3rd floor where the Board of Elections is located. Normally the ballots were brought in the front door, but not on this night. To verify the authenticity of his map, I downloaded the Google Earth image. There's Justice Drive. There's the parking lot, there's the building services storage facility, there's the loading dock, there's the Board of Elections building, oriented exactly the same way as this witness drew it. We have ballot accounting charts from numerous precincts in Warren County, and most of them show the hour at which the ballots left the polling place. The latest time we saw was 9:30. Both Erica Solvig, the reporter, and Susan Johnson, the director of the Board of Elections, verified to me quite independently of each other that ballots were still arriving at 12:30 in the morning through the back door. And this ballot accounting chart and the others show that they did indeed have 3 hours or more to tamper with the ballots, just as our eyewitness said. Now here's the chain of custody. And a breakdown in chain of custody is always necessary for ballot tampering to occur. The precinct judges, all by their lonesome, carry the ballots from the polling places downtown. At least they did in 2004. The precinct judges are members of whatever political party won that precinct in the governor's race. In Warren County, 2004, that was 157 Republicans and 0 Democrats, because Bob Taft carried every precinct in the county. And I asked Susan Johnson, did these precinct judges deliver the ballots directly to the Board of Elections? She said, why no? We have kids to unload the cars. This was actually the third county where kids had been fingered as culprits in the vote rigging schemes of boards of elections. And I don't think kids would know a precinct judge from Adam. I don't think they'd know if the ballots had come from the polling place, but my favorite question is this. Why were kids unloading ballots at 12:30 in the morning for a presidential election on a school night during a level 10 Homeland Security alert? So I don't believe her story. What I do believe is this. This is what the official results and the ballots tell me. If, behind closed doors, you take a specified number of ballots from each precinct, say 30 or 40, punched for Kerry, and move them one precinct up the list, they will be counted for Bush due to ballot rotation. And all the two-person races will flip for the ballots that are shifted. But voters do split their tickets. People who vote for president don't all vote for the down ticket offices either. So, for instance, for every 40 ballots that were counted for Kerry in the audited precincts, Ellen Connolly got 21 and Chief Justice Moyer got 9. So if you move 40 Kerry ballots, you're going to shift 40 Kerry votes to Bush, but only a net shift of 12 Connolly votes to Moyer. And lo and behold, John Kerry gets fewer votes than Ellen Connolly and even some of the other down-ticket candidates. And ballot initiatives don't rotate. Yes is positioned above no in every single precinct, in every punch card county in the state of Ohio. Votes for gay marriage remain votes for gay marriage no matter what precinct you count them in. So you're going to take gay-friendly Kerry voters and turn them into gay-friendly Bush voters. And Warren County is the only punch card county in the whole state of Ohio that had both anomalies, where Kerry got fewer votes than Connolly and Bush got more votes than issue 1. And if you look at the ballots and how the combinations of punches are attributed to the same voters on the same day, first of all, in the 15 precincts we audited, there were 400 ballots that were punched, or that were counted, for Republican candidates for every single contested office and for gay marriage. Straight ticket, gay-friendly Republicans. There would be some, but I don't think there'd be 415 precincts. And if you separate out the data sets in Warren County and other Connolly anomaly counties, we found that more than half, usually 60%, sometimes 2/3 or even 70% of the ballots counted for Ellen Connolly for Chief Justice were also counted for Bush. As if 2/3 of the supporters of a liberal black judge from Cleveland were secret admirers of George W. Bush. And more than half, in Warren County 51%, in other counties much more, of the ballots punched for gay marriage were counted for Bush. I don't know anybody who believes that if you are a supporter of gay marriage, or at least unwilling to write a ban on gay marriage into the Constitution, that you are more likely to vote for Bush than for Kerry. Now, we did get a court order to protect the ballots from destruction, but some of them were already destroyed. In Warren County, we photographed something like 10,000 ballots, and this needle in the haystack audit produced these. Here's what provisional ballots look like. There's the precinct number written in by the Board of Elections, hopefully before they mail them to the voters, but I'm actually suspicious of that because every single absentee ballot in every precinct we audited had the number written in a red flare and only 2 handwritings. That is possible, but it's not indicative of whichever clerk happened to pick up the ballot and whichever writing implement happened to be handy. But these are regular ballots issued to the polls, at the polls to walk-in voters. That's why it says WI. They're provisional ballots. There's the precinct printed on the back side, as is the custom by law in Ohio. So what are these? These aren't absentee ballots. There's no lines here to write in the precinct. These are absolute matches for the regular ballots issued at the polls, but there's no precinct printed on the back side. They had the ability to identify the precinct after the fact. They issued ballots at the polls with no precinct printed on the backside, something we found in no other county in Ohio. How could they do this? When they submitted their surviving ballots to Secretary of State Brunner, they admitted that they destroyed 22,726 unused ballots, and they submitted 11,000 extra ballots. I've got the packing slip. The print is too faint to show you here. But when I tallied up the number of ballots ordered all at once from Dayton Legal Blank, it does indeed total 11,000 fewer than this total. They did indeed have 11,000 off-the-books ballots in Warren County, which makes me wonder how many other counties did the same thing. Well, altogether, 56 counties out of 88 destroyed at least some of their elections records in violation of federal law, state law, and Secretary of State's directive. J. Kenneth Blackwell did his duty on this point. He is not culpable on this point. He issued a directive not once but twice saying, quote, all ballots used and unused must be retained for at least 22 months. That is not ambiguous. The blue counties that we audited that destroyed their unused ballots cannot prove that ballots were not punched in advance for third-party candidates. The red counties that we audited, which destroyed their unused ballots, except for Butler County and Delaware, cannot prove that fake ballots were not substituted for real ones because they can't account for all their ballots. I guess I'm still hoping for some kind of legal action on all this, but I guess that's because hope springs eternal. So far, our only legal victory was to protect their surviving ballots from destruction. 1 million unused ballots were destroyed, 600,000 voted ballots were destroyed, but that's only 10% of the voted ballots. We protected 90%. So far as we know, the record still exists under the custody of the Secretary of State. The ballot box is the only peaceful means for political change. If we don't have free and fair elections, we can't expect to achieve any of the changes that we might desire, no matter what they are. It's a fundamental underpinning. Election fraud undermines the very foundation of the United States of America. We need free and fair and open and transparent elections in this country. And all I can do is hope to spread awareness and get people to monitor their elections to make sure that all eligible voters are allowed to vote without interference for the candidates of their choice and have their votes counted as cast. Whatever it takes to bring that about. And thank you so much for bearing with me. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm going to do one more by request. I've recorded 10 CDs by now, 8 of them solo, and all the songs are original or traditional except this one, the only song I've ever recorded by another songwriter. This is by Victoria Parks of Columbus, Ohio, and the song is called My Vote Don't Matter Anymore. We stood in lines outside 3 hours, maybe 4, a rainy November 2nd, 2004. All across our nation, too many to ignore. We turned out in numbers they'd never seen before. I should know, dear, I've been floating here since the Second World War. My name is Amos Connolly. Now they're telling me my vote don't matter anymore. They took my name, they purged it from the roll. What they gained did not compare with what they stole. This is my democracy. Don't you go telling me my vote don't matter anymore. The fix was in. That's all she wrote. They did not win. Our